So, hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I have for you my March wrap up. I ended up reading 14 books in the month of March. So pretty good for me. You'll find like an underlying theme in all the books that I read in the month of March. I'll just let you see. But yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first So the first book I read in March was Rhapsodic by Laurent, and Rhapsodic is about a girl named Callie who's a siren, and she ends up doing something really bad when she is young, and so she calls on the bargainer, who is the Dark Fae King named Desmond Flynn, and from there they end up kind of developing like this friendship, and through that they end up making a lot of deals where Callie ends up with an arm full of beads, and each bead signifies a deal with the bargainer. So she ends up with like over 300, I think it ends up being, and after that, Desmond disappears, and he shows up 7 years later and asks for Callie's help in figuring out why all of these Fae women keep disappearing, and when they reappear, the women are in a coma and they're holding children that they seem to have given birth to. So, like I said, this is the first book in the series. I think there's like 5 books or something like that. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. It was very, very good. I actually, so my reasoning behind not giving it 5 stars was because I felt like, one, there wasn't a ton of I don't want to say smut because that's not what I mean, but like there wasn't a ton of like romance in this, and I kind of picked it up for the romance. Like there's romance, but it's not like the romance. I don't even want to say it's not the primary part of the story because it is, but it's not like there's a lot of other things going on, and so the romance for me kind of took a back seat to everything else, which is not a bad thing, but that's kind of what I wanted. But it was still very good. Like I said, I gave it 4 stars. So, and I've already started the second book. I can't find it anywhere right now. So, yeah. But I already started the second book, A Strange Hymn, and I'm really looking forward to it. So, yeah. The next book I read is one I don't own, so you'll see it right here, and it was Machiavellian by Bella de Corte, and I think I gave this one 4 stars as well. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I gave this one 4 stars also, and this book was basically about this girl. I don't remember her name. Okay, so this book is about a girl named Mari who ends up, she's like down on her luck. She ends up losing her job because she has a run-in with a, like, it's hard to explain. She's hungry because she doesn't have any money, and so she's standing outside of a restaurant and she's thinking to herself about how much she wished she could have that food, and she ends up getting in an argument with like the maitre d' of the restaurant, or the maitre d' of the restaurant, and that kind of stops her from getting to work, and she's late, and so her boss ends up firing her, and from then on she has like a ton of bad luck. Like she gets kicked out of her apartment. She ends up at her best friend's house, who her best friend is also struggling with money but not as bad, and so her best friend has a roommate, and the roommate ends up going out and she never comes back. The police come knocking on the door and they tell her that, or they tell them that the roommate has been killed. And so Mari ends up going into this roommate's room, and she realizes that the roommate had like this big break of a job, and so she planned on not to be struggling for money anymore. So Mari decides she's gonna impersonate the roommate and go to this club and see what the job was. And she ends up going to this club, and it's not what she thought it was. It is, but it isn't. So, she ends up from there kind of ends up in a relationship with this capo Machiavello, and it's so hard to explain this story because it's a lot of things that kind of like lead into this. The story wasn't bad. I really enjoyed it. It was just I don't want to say choppy either. It was kind of choppy, but I think that's why I didn't give it 5 stars. Not because I didn't enjoy it. I did. I read it really quickly, but it was like first you're here, then you're here, then you're here, and it's like it's a lot of things happening in a row. But she ends up falling in love with this mafia boss, but there's a lot of secrets from her past. She doesn't know who her family is. She was in the foster system, and this guy seems to know more about her than he's letting on. So it's really interesting. I did enjoy it for what it was, so there's that. The next book I read was Laurent and the Beast by K.A. American, and this book was okay. I gave this book 5 stars. It was nothing that I was expecting, and yet everything that I wanted, if that makes any sense. So basically, this book is about a guy named Laurent who was born in he lived in the 1800s, and he was gay, and because of that, he had to be very secretive with who he expressed his desire in. So he ends up meeting this man who's very rich in the town that he lives in, and this man seems to show an interest in him and invites him to his home. He goes to this man's home, and the man ends up not being who he expected, and he ends up killing this man. This is not spoilers, by the way. This happens in the very first chapter of the book. It's the very beginning. So he kills this man, and resulting in that, he ends up making a deal with a demon to save his life, so he doesn't end up going to prison or being hanged. So he makes a deal with a demon that he will go and to a land where he can be who he wants to be with whoever he wants to be, and he doesn't have to face any repercussions for it. And in return for this demon, he will, one, keep a man named Beast alive until his 33rd birthday, and two, make sure that a man named King stays the president. And Laurent really doesn't know what that means, but he agrees, and he flashes forward to 2017, where he ends up in a room in a biker MC clubhouse. Then you have your second main character named Beast, and Beast is the son of I think it's called the Hell's King. I don't even know if you can hear her snoring right behind me. Can you hear that? Anyway, so Beast is the son of the president of the Kings of Hell MC, and he has lived a very reclusive adult life because when he was younger and in his early 20s, I think he was like 21 when it happened, he tried to save his mom from an accident and ended up on fire and badly scarred and burned on one side of his body. And so, because of that, Beast has very low self esteem, and he doesn't let anyone get close to him because he doesn't believe that anybody can love him based on how he looks. And this is kind of their love story. But one of the catches to what Laurent is doing is that he can't tell Beast that he's what he's been sent there to do. So this story was so good. I don't even know how to properly explain it. It was one, I wasn't expecting the time travel aspect. Even reading the synopsis of it, which I did, but I don't know, some part of my brain was not taking in the part about it being time travel, and then MC, and then it had parts of paranormal. It was just a lot of things, but it worked in this book, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. So I definitely want to keep going on with the series. I just haven't found the time because I've been reading other things, but I do want to keep going on. So the next book I read for March was Captive in the Underworld by Liang Yutan, and this book I gave 3 stars. It wasn't a bad book. Basically, when the heck did I just get on there? Anyway, so basically this is a sapphic Hades and Persephone retelling, and I want to say I gave this 3 stars not because it was a bad book, but just because it wasn't for me. Like, it just didn't, the story wasn't as intriguing for me as I wanted it to be. Like, there were a lot of good points in it, and there was some parts of action, there was some like sexy scenes, but it wasn't as enticing as I wanted it to be. And I love Hades and Persephone retellings, especially sapphic ones, and this just didn't hit it for me, but it wasn't bad. So the next book I read was Kels Keeper, and Kels Keeper is about a guy named Kel who goes home to kind of do like a favor for his parents, where he wants to like do something special for them since they've gone off and they've gone on this trip. And he ends up getting a knock on the door and finding out that his parents have died in a carbon monoxide leak, and he kind of spirals from there. Now, I will say this is it's a gay book, but it also dabbles a lot with religion and who you are religious wise if you are gay. And this also is an age gap and like slight BDSM. So there's that. Basically, Kel ends up spiraling, and his neighbor Luke, who he's known pretty much his whole life, they end up starting up a relationship. And when Luke sees Kel is struggling, he invites him to stay in his home, and he's kind of afraid to tell Kel that he's gay because he doesn't want him to think that he invited him there because he wants to be with him. He wants him to actually heal. It's very sweet, and their story is very, like, while it does have all those aspects like age gap, BDSM, like all of those things, it is still a very sweet love story, which is why I think I enjoyed it so much. And I couldn't put it down. I finished it in one sitting. It was so good. So there's that. So the next book that I read in the month of March is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. And this book, guys, this book. So I started this book in January and I didn't finish it until March. And let me just say, I gave the book 5 stars. So it's not because it was a bad book by any stretch of the imagination at all. But this book, okay, so this book has a lot of intrigue. It has a lot of elements that I really like. Like, there's angst, there's like smutty scenes, there's killing, which is always good. There's like bad people getting killed for the stuff that they did. Like, it has all that stuff that I really like. But this book, so I remember when I first started this book, I was reading it only physically. And I looked at my brother, and I looked at him, and I was like, I really like this book, but it took 40 pages to get through one scene. I think it was 40 pages. So, like, example would be, in the beginning of the book, she is in a bar, right? So the first, like, 30 to 40 pages is just describing her in this bar and everything that is going on in this bar that she's seeing. Does that make sense? So, like, the beginning of the book, it wasn't info dumpy. I don't want to say it like that, but it's just a lot of slow burnness, and I don't mean in a romantic way. I just mean it's a lot of slow burn to get to the plot, to get through the intrigue, to get anywhere. Anyway, let me describe this book, or tell you the synopsis of this book first. So basically, From Blood and Ash, if you don't know what it's about a girl named Poppy who is the maiden. And the maiden is this, like, deity in this world who is looked at as a gift from the gods. So she is to remain chaste. She's not allowed to talk to people. She is not allowed to show her face. She can't have relationships with people, none of that. and she is to continue this until she ascends. And nobody really talks about what ascending means. They don't really explain what you do or where you go or any of that. You just know that the first sons and daughters of people ascend. And Poppy and her brother lost their parents when they were young, and they were killed by what they call the Craven, which are like these bad vampire hybrid type things. And so from there, the story kind of progresses in a like from it's so hard to explain because it's a long book and I should have grabbed it. It's up there on my shelf, but I don't feel like grabbing it. So the story, it takes like some turns I was expecting, some turns I wasn't expecting. Poppy is, I don't know. I don't know. I think part of this of my like uncertainty with it is that, or why it took me so long, is that she's not a dislikable character, but she's not a character that I love either, if that makes sense. Like in terms of like going through the parts of this book I like the plot, I like the intrigue, I like the atmosphere, I like how the book is written, but I don't like Poppy herself as a character, if that makes sense. So, like, you have all of these really great aspects of this book, and then one aspect I didn't like, which is why it still ended up making a 5-star, but I don't know if this book would be for everybody. So, there. That was like a long-winded explanation for this book. I'll just move on. The next book I read was Him by Aubrey Dark. And Him is about a girl who makes this bet with her best friend that this guy, anybody, basically the next guy she sees, and she ends up kissing a guy in an elevator and asking him out, and he turns her down, but little does she know, the reason he is in this library is because he is planning to kill somebody who is visiting the library as well. So this girl, she sees this guy has dropped a paper. It has like some code on it. She doesn't really understand, so she decides, well, I'm gonna go to this guy's house and and kind of talk to him and try to chat him up and see if he'll rethink going out with me again. And so she goes to this guy's house and she looks in the window and she sees him murdering this man. Um, and so this guy sees her looking through his window and he takes her and locks her up in his house, and this is their love story, basically. Um, it's it's not bad. I think I gave it a 4-star. Yeah, I gave it a 4-star. This is kind of like the month of 4 stars for me. This story, it was way deeper than I thought it was gonna go. Like, I kind of thought it would be like oh, what is that book? Born Darkly series. You know, where you have the therapist and she falls in love with the serial killer. It is, but it's not. So she does fall in love with the serial killer, but it's not exactly what you think. It's more like a Dexter turn to it, where he only kills bad people. It's different, but in a good way, if that makes sense. And he also has a very interesting backstory to him that you don't expect. So I really like this book, even though it wasn't exactly what I was expecting. Because like in Born Darkly, he's like, yeah, I'm a killer, but I'm okay with that. And then in this story, this guy's like, yeah, I'm a killer, and I'm not really okay with it, but I still feel the urge to do it. So yeah, depends on what you want in your story, but it was good for what it was. The next book I read was a graphic novel, and it was Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and this is basically like a Sabrina retelling, but in a modern society. That makes sense. So like it was kind of like if you took 90s Sabrina with Melissa Joan Hart and took the like recent Chilling Adventures and just like mashed them up together and made one story. That's pretty much how I think of it, because you have like elements of one and elements of the other. So you still have your classic Sabrina, Harvey, the Ants, Salem, all that, but you also have like your Nick from like the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. So you still have your kind of like Nicholas Scratch character, bad boy, love triangle type thing that she has going on. So it was good. I think I gave it 3 or 4 stars. 3 stars. I gave it 3 stars. It was different than what I was expecting, which I think is why it only got 3 star. But it wasn't bad. I enjoyed it. So I had a good time. Okay, so the next book I read was Bound by Honor by Cora Riley. And this book I gave 4 stars. Um, this book's about a girl named Arya who has been born into the mafia world. So she knows that she is going to be told who she's going to marry. She's supposed to be a submissive wife to her husband, and she doesn't really have a choice in that. And she knows that. She's been raised that way her whole life. She knows what life entails. So when her father comes to her and tells her, hey, I found you a husband and you have to marry him, she's not surprised, but she is surprised by who her father wants her to marry. So Arya is from the Chicago outfit of the mafia, and the man that she is said to marry is the capo of the New York mafia, the New York Familia. And his name's Luca, and she has only ever heard very bad things about him, that he has a temper, that he's very violent, that he was very young when he became a made man and killed his first man. So she is almost afraid, not almost, she is very afraid to marry him. And she's told this when she's 16. So 2 years go by and they get married. And this is basically their story because Luca ends up turning out to be not the man that Arya thought he was. So, one, I will say this story does involve cheating. It's violent, but not super violent. It's not as much action in it as I thought it would be. So, there is that. But I did enjoy this. A lot of people love Cora Riley. I don't think I'm one of those people. Like, while I do enjoy her stories, and I have read quite a few, so this was just my first one I read, but I actually went on to continue in that series. It wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, if that makes sense. I don't know how to explain it better than that. The story, I almost wish the story was longer, because I feel like it needed more to it, if that makes sense. I don't know how to explain it better than that, but yeah. So I just felt like it was short and it wasn't enough. I did enjoy that even though they were both two people who really didn't want to marry each other, they didn't know each other, they were virtually strangers, they did, even though it was cheating in the beginning, it was made very clear that cheating wasn't something that was going to be involved in their marriage if it was going to work. And so in order for their marriage to work, they needed to work together and be together. And I did enjoy that part. And I really enjoyed that conversation. But I don't know. I just feel like this didn't have enough intrigue in it for me to love it. Does that make sense? Like, I went through the story, but it wasn't like, ooh, I need to, like, get back to it. If that makes sense. I hope it does. So, if you see any moving, it's because my dog is right behind me. I'm not going to say her name. Her name's Belle. But if I, like, say it too loudly, she'll start moving and she'll come out. I mean, if she does, then okay. But my bed is actually made, but this is actually my top blanket. But she kind of, like, took one of my ones that was folded up and made her own bed in my bed. So her head is, like, right behind me. Over here, you can't even see her, but so if you see any movement, that's who it is. There's nothing like weird going on with my bed. That's just her. So yeah, anyway, so the next book I have to discuss is, I read the second book in that series, which is Bound by Duty, which I think it's I don't even remember what the series is called. Born in Blood Mafia series. There you go. So it's the Born in Blood Mafia Chronicles. I read book 2, which is Dante and Valentina's story. So Dante is the boss of the Chicago outfit, and Valentina she's a girl from there, but she's quite older. She's 23. Her husband has died, and she's recently become a widow. I think it's been like 6 months, I think, since her husband died, and her parents decide that it's time for her to get married again, and they're excited when the boss wants to marry their daughter. And in the same sense, Valentina is very happy because she can marry and she will no longer be a virgin because she's been keeping the secret that her husband was gay, and so they never actually consummated their marriage. This one I liked more than the first one, but it definitely wasn't my favorite one. The third one was definitely my favorite one out of the 3 that I've read so far. So basically, the story ends up it's very funny because you have Valentina who is trying to entice her husband to sleep with her, and Dante is not into it. It's not that he's not into her, but he still feels very bound to his first wife who died, and they were in love and they married for love, and then she died, and so he's still very wrapped up in his emotions toward her, and he feels like it's disrespectful for him to be in love with someone else and it's like when she passed away, and it feels like he's betraying like her memory. So the story was very interesting. It was very funny at points because she's like, well, what do I have to do to make him interested in me? Like, I'm wearing all this sexy stuff, I'm like trying to like entice him, and nothing, he gives me nothing. And then he it just kind of pretends like he doesn't notice anything that she's doing, and he'll just be like, I'm tired, roll over, go to sleep. uh so it was very funny there. I did there are also some very like sad parts about this, because on the one hand, you have Valentina and Dante's story, and on the other hand, you have her cousin, who I can't remember her name right now, who is also married, but she's married to like Dante's complete opposite, where Dante is very kind. He doesn't really voice anything. He's not like cruel, but he's not overly affectionate. You have her cousin who's married to this man who's very abusive, doesn't mind raping her, beating her, and all this stuff, and it's very sad. So there is that, and that was a very like sad part of the story. I found this one was more so not about love. Like, yeah, they did grow to love each other, but this one was more about learning how to trust each other with your secrets, because they're both holding very big secrets to themselves, and they kind of have to learn, like, hey, I married this person, they are now my partner in this, and we have to trust each other. Can you see her moving? Can you see her? Like, okay, there we go. But but yeah, it's kind of like them learning that this is now my partner and I can trust you. And I feel like that's an interesting dynamic to kind of look into. So I really enjoyed that aspect of this. And I gave it 4 stars as well, I believe. So that was really good. The next book I read was, hold on, let me grab it because I do have it somewhere over here. Oh, screw it. Okay, so I can't find it. But the next book I'm going to talk about, you'll see here, is Therapy Game Volume 1. So Therapy Game is about this guy named Shizuma who has just been broken up, or just been dumped by his girlfriend of 2 years, I think, when he walks into her apartment and, well, he walks to her apartment and knocks on the door and is answered by another man, and she tells him that she's in love with that other man and she doesn't love him anymore. So he has just been dumped. He goes to this bar with his friends. He ends up getting really drunk, where he meets this guy, Minato, who is kind of like the anti-relationship is. He doesn't want a relationship. He doesn't like attachment at all. And they end up waking up in bed together, where Shizuma doesn't really remember anything that happened the night before, but Minato does, and he ends up really offended that Shizuma doesn't remember anything, and they get into a big fight. Minato, being very upset, ends up making a bet that he will make Shizuma fall in love with him, and then he will dump him and break his heart. So this one ended on such a cliffhanger. I do have volume 2, I just haven't read it yet, but it ended up ending on such a sad cliffhanger that it kind of broke my heart a little bit. I gave this one 4 stars, and it was just, it was so good though. It was heartwarming, it was very cute, and I just really liked it. It's hard to explain in a way that makes sense, but basically Minato ends up going through all these things, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna entice him, but I'm gonna use sex to entice him, and sex doesn't really work for Shizuma. He's not really interested in the sex part. Yeah, sex is great, but I really want a relationship. I want to get to know you before I realize, before we kind of bring sex into it as a means of the relationship. So it was really cute in that way. Not that they don't sleep together, because that does happen, but it's kind of like, yeah, this happened, but does it really mean anything towards what we're going for? So there is that. I just really, really love this story. I'm excited for book 2. So we'll see how I like that one. I was gonna say the last book, but it's definitely not the last book. So the last book I read in the Born in Blood series, well, it's not the last book of the series, but it's the last one I read, was Bound by Hatred. Bound in Hatred, Bound by Hatred. One of those. And this one was definitely my favorite one out of the 3 that I read. This one is about Mateo and Gianna. And Mateo is, well, they're both the younger siblings of the couple from the first story, Luca and Arya. So Gianna is Arya's younger sister, and and Mateo is Luca's younger brother. And Mateo is like instantly obsessed with Gianna as soon as he sees her, and he decides he wants to marry her. And he kind of does that by any means necessary. Well, Gianna is like the anti-marriage, and is not anti-marriage. I shouldn't say that. She wants to marry, and she wants to have kids and a family and all those things, but she doesn't want to do it in the mafia. She doesn't want her family or her children to be in the mafia. She doesn't agree with the violence and the harsh life, or being a submissive wife to her husband. She doesn't agree with any of those things. And so she runs away. And Mateo, being as obsessed with her as he is, gives chase. And he finds her, and he kind of drags her back. And he forced her into a marriage, but he doesn't really force her into a marriage, because once she comes back, she kind of realizes that, okay, I have to marry him in order to survive. So they quickly realize that they are each other's allies in this, and it is such a good story. It's definitely like a enemies to lovers, but not enemies. They very early, well, Gianna very early on, because Mateo was never her enemy. He was obsessed with her, no matter what anybody says. But Gianna realized very early on, that Mateo's not really her enemy, and he is just wanting to make her happy. And I loved this story. So good. So good. Definitely my favorite one so far out of the series. I want to finish it and then see how I feel, but as of right now, it's my favorite one. I don't know what that was. I don't know what they're doing in there. But yeah, definitely my favorite one so far. Okay, so the last 2 books I read were both by Katie Robert, and it's book 3 and 4 in her Wicked Villain series. And so the first one I read was A Worthy Opponent, and this one is about Hook and Tink. And Tink has just completed her 5-year deal with Hades, and she's now being kicked out of the Underworld and has to kind of make her own way. And she's afraid because the reason she made a deal with Hades to work for him in the Underworld was because she was trying to get away from Peter, aka Peter Pan. But Peter, who was very abusive to her, he basically kept her as his slave, and she wanted away from him, so she made a deal with Hades. And Hook, who was a, like, I don't know what you call it, like a general, like a underboss for Peter, ended up overthrowing Peter and taking his territory and kicking Peter out. Well, Hook has always wanted Tink, even when she was with Peter. He tried to get her out, but she didn't go with him for reasons, and so Hook is now her only hope. And Hook says that I will help you and I will bring you Peter's head on a platter, but you have to marry me as in return, as part of our deal. So she marries him, and it's their love story. It's interesting to hear their backstory because it's not a very good one for either one of them. They didn't have a very good life growing up. So their stories are very interesting, and it was nice to kind of, okay, one, Peter Pan is not my favorite Disney movie by far, and you always hear about Peter's backstory, but you never hear about Hook or Tink, and I really enjoy that. So there's that. Take that as you will. Like, I don't really like Peter Pan to begin with, but hearing about the villains is more enticing to me than hearing about Peter Pan. So I don't know what it is about that one, but yeah. So I really enjoyed this one. I gave 4 stars, I think. Four? No, I gave this one 5 stars, I think. Yeah, I gave this one 5 stars, and I think I gave the next one 4 stars. Yeah. So the next one I read in that series is The Beast, and this one is about Isabel, Gaetan, and Beast. So basically, Isabel is the youngest daughter of the Man in Black, who has just died from cancer, and so his territory has gone to his older daughter, his oldest daughter. But because Gaetan and Beast, who had both had relationships with Isabel, have left, and they were his strongest generals, the territory is now being attacked. And to prevent that, the sister sends Isabel after Gaetan and the Beast to bring them back and to help them defend the territory. So she ends up going to the Underworld and she meets them there, and they strike up a deal that she will be theirs for 2 weeks to do whatever they want, and after the 2 weeks she will have to choose between one of them, and they will, no matter what, go back to the territory and help them defend it. This story, to be perfectly honest, the reason I've kind of like stopped and haven't read past book 2 is because I honestly didn't think I would like any of the stories following this. Because the premise of them didn't sound very good, especially this one. This was probably one of the least ones, this one and another one that I haven't read yet, but I ended up liking this one a lot more than I thought. This, like I said, is like it ends up in like a polyamorous relationship with, between Belle and Gaetan and Beast, and it's interesting. You know what it is too, I think, because every time somebody says Beast, you think like of the Beast, not of the prince he turns into. And in this story, Beast is not a beast, he's a man, but he's called Beast because he's a ruthless person. So it's interesting. But the way like the dynamic of this relationship works is also very interesting because Belle is a submissive, Gaetana is a switch, so he's both a submissive and can be a dominant, and then Beast is just a dominant. So it's a very interesting dynamic to the relationship, and I do enjoy it. I enjoyed it more than I thought, which is, like I said, why I think I gave it 4 stars, because just going into it, I wasn't excited. The story was, I think, part of why I enjoyed it so much was because I liked that dynamic, that relationship dynamic so much. So there's that. But I don't think it was like anything revolutionary in it that happened. Like, really, the story takes place over the span of, I want to say, 2 or 3 days. There's not much storyline to it. So there's that. There's a lot of sex in this. A lot. So, yeah. But, yeah. I don't know if I have anything. I don't know where I was going with that. But, yeah, I did enjoy it. I enjoyed it more than I thought. It was good. 4 stars. There you go. And then, no, that was it. That was the last book I read. Okay, yeah, that is everything. Alright, I'll catch you guys in my next video. Thank you for watching, and subscribe if you wanna. And bye, guys.